You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to your local watering hole for all things geeky. I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as she is every single week, the one, the only, Christy Morris.
Yes, with my sword and my feather and my cap and my lovely blue and silver cape.
Oh, it's a very nice cape.
Yeah. We even have a flag.
Ooh, that's good. Oh, man. I'm excited about this with this episode because we are going to talk about a movie that I've been watching since it came out. I guess gave away part of the outline. Anyway, before we dive into the episode where we're talking about the Three Musketeers from 1993 from Walt Disney Pictures, make sure you're looking for us everywhere. I did want to say a quick thank you. We got a review over on Apple Podcasts from Jedi DS saying, a wonderful show and wonderful host, 5 stars. This podcast is a blessing. Thank you for all you do. May the Force be with you always. We appreciate that thought, Jedi DS, because, wow, that made me feel really good when I read that.
Aw, thank you so much. That was really just really kind words. Thank you.
Yeah, it's, so if you would like to leave us a review, go over to, Apple Podcasts and give us a star rating review. We'll read that out in the show. You can find us wherever you get your podcast to, Spotify or any other podcatcher. Of course, you can find us on Twitter now at the 602 Club, and then we're on Instagram too at the 602 Club TFM. So both places, make sure you're following us because we're going to be doing a drawing for followers of those 2 accounts there to Amazon. We're going to be giving away a $25 gift card, and well, honestly, we'd love for you to be the winner. All you got to do is follow us at one of those places. So that's pretty great. And yeah, share the shows. Talk to us about what you've got going on, what you're thinking of the show, and, any thoughts you have on the movies we're talking about or the entertainment news of the day. Of course, you can find us on Twitter for the entire network at Trek FM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. There's a listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference you can join and talk to listeners from all over the world. And then Trek.fm is a place you can go and check out everything we've got going on the network. Plus, you can go to the contact section and write Christy and I an email. So all of those places are places that you can find us, follow us, like us, subscribe, all of that. And, of course, we also want to say a huge thank you. We've got some great associate producers through Patreon. Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Millette, Daniel Noah, thank you so much for supporting the show and all that you do for the network through Patreon. Patreon is the way that you can support the network and make sure all of the shows are coming to you each and every week. We have so much going on the network. And honestly, every little bit helps to make sure that happens. So again, go to patreon.com, see how you can be part of the team. So, Christy, as I mentioned, movie came out in 93. And so I'm interested to know what your original experience with this, because you're a little bit younger than I am.
Not too much. It wasn't that bad. But I actually, it's funny, usually my story's about me and my dad, but this one I vividly remember because I was at one of my cousin's houses and saw it when it had recently come out. She happened to have the videotape, if anybody remember those. And she's a little bit older than me, so she was always kind of like my big sister. And so I remember sitting down in her living room floor and watching it together, and I was 6 years old. So
nice. That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm trying to remember if I had seen this in the theater or if it was something that I saw later on. And I honestly, it's been so long, I just can't remember. But this is definitely a movie that I grew up with. And we definitely
same.
had the VHS tape the same, like that you guys had. And it was a movie that was in, I would say heavy rotation for me growing up. And so this is definitely something that's just kind of a part, like, you have those movies like that are part of your childhood, whether it was like, if it was like Goonies or for some people it was, like The Never-Ending Story or something like that. And so, yeah, this has just been with me for a long time. And so, definitely biased towards the movie.
Yeah.
Because it's something I grew up with. So, I mean, do you feel that way too about this one?
Oh, for sure. Nostalgia is the word with this movie for me. It's, like you said, along the same ranks of Never-Ending Story. For me, also Princess Bride. Things like that are just the classics I remember and like romanticize.
Yeah. So I just think it's just really, it is really interesting, these type of movies, when you go back to them. And something that I was really interested in to go then because of that, at that point in life, like I was, 14. So I wasn't into really yet production of movies and getting, going to check out what their, reviews were and things like that. So, I was really fascinating to learn that, this is a movie actually that quite a bit of people wanted to be in. Chris O'Donnell obviously gets the role of D'Artagnan, but I didn't know that Brad Pitt and Stephen Dorff had actually turned down the role for D'Artagnan. So that would have been really interesting if one of those two had shown up as D'Artagnan. And I especially think of, Brad Pitt and where he went in life. It would have been very different movie, I feel like, with him as the main lead for sure.
It's interesting though, because if you think about just even the look of the character at that time in filmmaking, Brad Pitt had kind of a similar look to Chris O'Donnell at this age. Like he was kind of that character if you ever saw like A River Runs Through It or
Yep.
Yeah. So, totally the like dashing hero kind of character. And I could totally see him in this role. So I am surprised to see that he turned it down though.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, I'm not sure as to why, he would have at that point. It may have just been he was too busy or wasn't really necessarily interested, in doing the film at that point. I'm trying to think of just the things that he would have been doing. I mean, I think the biggest thing, he would have been in A River Runs Through It. That would have been something that had kind of really put him in the map because Robert Redford had directed that. It was kind of a big deal. And so, yeah. And then, he was in California too. It's just really interesting. I mean, and that might have been one of the reasons too. Maybe he couldn't do it. He had done both of those movies, and when this one's filming, maybe he couldn't. He may have just honestly have wanted to do those movies instead. He was in Cool World 2 in '92. So,
he was probably filming Interview with the Vampire.
He could have been doing that too. Yeah, absolutely. Which, obviously a huge deal. Really puts him on the map, and something that, with doing that with Tom Cruise, I can imagine turning this down to do that. I was also really interested too. Disney was going after some really big people. They were going after like William Baldwin, Jean-Claude Van Damme, interestingly enough, Al Pacino, Johnny Depp, Carrie Ulls, and Gary Oldman, all as characters to be in this movie. And I could kind of see some, like, I'm pretty sure Al Pacino they probably would have wanted is Colonel Richelieu is my guess, or Gary Oldman in that role. Maybe Carrie Ulls is playing the Captain Rochefort, maybe, possibly, or maybe one of the Musketeers. I don't know. Yeah. But just they were definitely going after people. They wanted this to be a big deal, and I think we can kind of see from who gets cast. They were going after some big late 80s, early 90s stars to make this a thing. So I thought it was interesting too, and I didn't know this because, this is well before, getting cool extras on anything as well for the most part.
Right.
That Kiefer Sutherland and Chris O'Donnell and Oliver Platt, they had to do 6 weeks of fencing and riding lessons, which is really cool, which I think actually really makes sense. And then Charlie Sheen missed that because he was doing Hot Shots Part 2. But honestly, I felt like that may have been one of the things that really stood out to me the most as a kid in this movie, because I grew up watching like Earl Flynn movies and things like that. And I always really loved the sword fighting in this. So I felt like they did a great job of creating some good, fun, memorable sword fights between different characters and having it look good as well. So
I definitely agree with that. I think that I was really trying to tell myself if maybe at times Chris O'Donnell did some of his own stunts. I don't necessarily think he did all of them. I don't know if he's that acrobatic of a person, but I think that for sure at the beginning when he does that jump where he puts both hands on the back of the horse and jumps on, I'm going, how? How does anyone do that? You could seriously hurt yourself.
Yeah,
in so many ways. And then, when he also stands up in the saddle and then jumps over the little bridge, just those kind of things, I think really make it stand out. And as a kid, especially being the ages we were, you're fascinated by that stuff. And then you want to go and try to do it in the backyard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think, talking about the sword fights, Bob Anderson, who is known for, he was an Olympic fencer. He was a well-known, renowned fight choreographer for things such as The Princess Bride, The Mask of Zorro, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. He is epic. He actually plays and he's uncredited as the sword master who is teaching the king fencing in the film. So my guess is that that's one of the reasons the sword fights have that kind of classic swashbuckling film feel, is that he had been responsible for some of our most memorable sword fights on screen, so makes complete sense that this would look so good in that way, which is really important when you're having a Three Musketeers movie. Half the movie is really about this thing, which is sword fighting. This is what these characters are known for. This is what the Musketeers are famous for. And so, yeah, really appreciate the work that they put into that part. So this is the thing that kind of shocked me, because I wasn't into looking at the reception of films at that point. I was just barely getting into any of that kind of thing. And I, looking this up now and doing some research, seeing this movie is not really well received back in the day. It has a very low Rotten Tomatoes score, which at the 28% based on 29 reviews. So that's not very good.
Right.
I think it's one of those things, like I have such a thought process for this film that goes back to being a kid and growing up with it, that it never occurred to me that there were basically people who are critics that didn't like this movie.
Or maybe didn't see it at a young age, so they don't have that same nostalgia that we do. So they're just seeing it as an adult and thinking it seems a little silly, I guess, was the overwhelming review that I saw. But it still surprised me, just like it did you, because it's something that is so beloved, at least by us and by so many people I know.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me. And, it's one of those things too where I think we can clearly see as well. It reminds me a little bit of how people talk about the prequel trilogy in reference to kids these days, and how, don't have the kids watch the prequel trilogy, it stinks, and yet all the kids that I know that grew up with the prequel trilogy, they love it, right? Because that was their Star Wars. That's what they grew up with.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show how, what critics necessarily think of a film isn't what people that actually just watch it are going to necessarily think. And I have that response to films these days too, that get maybe possibly panned by critics, but I still end up liking it, you know? So it just goes to show that it's really not important what critics think. It's really only important what you think and if you like the movie, and if you find value in it. So,
and then for me, I know I've mentioned before, there's some movies that I know are just terrible movies. Not this one.
Sure. Yeah.
But I still love them.
Right.
I don't care what anybody else says. I'm always going to love Clueless. Don't at me.
You know, and I think, yeah. So there are many movies which people would call their like guilty pleasure films, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they know it's not the world's best movie, but they still get enjoyment out of it. You know, like, hey, Blue Crush is one of my guilty pleasure films.
Me too.
I wouldn't say it's a great film.
Yeah.
It's, you know, but who cares? Like, I like it. That's really all that matters.
Now you want to learn to surf.
There you go. Exactly. So, you know, if Kate Bosworth wants to teach me, hey, there you go. So, yeah. So I think, you know, it's just so, like, we get so bogged down sometimes in especially in like the film community of people who are really paying attention to all this stuff. You know, we kind of forget there's a whole segment of the population, and it's really a majority of people who are not so heavily invested in, did this movie get good reviews or any of those things, you know? So we just get kind of myopic in that, and we get into these little echo chambers, and we think our version of reality, what we're hearing on Twitter, is reality, and that's just obviously not the case. And so I am interested. So the cast of the movie, there's so many people in this, and I figured the best place to start was with Chris O'Donnell, because he's the one which the story is revolved around. They've really simplified the story here for the Three Musketeers, and there's this is one of the Dumas books that I have not read. I read The Count of Monte Cristo, which is a phenomenal book. So I've loved to one day get a chance to read Three Musketeers, but I do know this is a story that they've really, you know, simplified and, you know, kind of Disney-ified in some ways. But D'Artagnan is the one who the story is kind of revolving around, in the sense that he's the eyes through which we're kind of seeing most of the film and everything that's happening. And so Chris O'Donnell has I think is a load to carry here, big time. Like he's the one who kind of brings us into the film, and we're kind of really experiencing everything with him. So how do you think he does, maybe now that you watch the movie as an adult? Do you still think he does a good job? Or, I'm really interested to see what you think watching this as an adult.
I really did try to look at it a little bit more objectively, but I will say, first and foremost, even though people may get annoyed with me, man, that dude's hot.
And everybody's so young in this movie too. Obviously, it's like, yeah. So that was the other thing. Like, it was like, oh my gosh, look at how young everyone is, especially Chris O'Donnell. And he looks like a baby. Yeah. In this film, he literally has baby face at this point.
But I think that he objectively as well does a really great job of getting across that he's trying to follow in his father's footsteps. The surprise of finding out that Rochefort killed his father, and then the whole relationship with each one of the Musketeers he's trying to build through it being this unknowing kid that really wants to accomplish this dream, but doesn't really know what he's getting into, still kind of a little naive and immature. So I really think that he holds his own, even though he's got a lot to carry in this movie. I'd love to know what you think.
I still would say this is a movie that I really enjoy, and I enjoyed rewatching for sure, because it had been a while since I'd revisited it. But I think a little bit more objectively that the weak link in the cast is actually Chris O'Donnell. I do feel like he comes off a little bit too earnest in some places and just too green. I think part of that is that he is surrounded by people who have been doing this for so much longer than he has, and they're all kind of effortless in their roles, whereas I can tell how hard he's trying, and I think that just differentiates him from just about everybody else. I don't think it makes the movie bad. or anything like that. And part of that is because I really like, especially the other Three Musketeers, so much in this film. And to me, him playing off them is fine. You know, like, he's not my favorite part of the movie, so it doesn't matter anyway. But I would say for me, rewatching this, I do see where he's not the best part of the movie. And that's okay. I mean, like, I'm going to give him a break, and part of that is because I really enjoy all the other performances that we get in this movie, and him being, I guess, the weakest link of that is fine, because I really enjoy just about every single other person that's cast in this movie, and, you know, what they do in the film. I think they do a great job, so.
Yeah, you know, I want to mention, too, I think that the way that Kiefer Sutherland relates with him, their characters, you know, with Athos and D'Artagnan, Athos really kind of becomes like a father figure to him. And I think that makes a little bit more up for what you're feeling is lacking.
No, I think you're right. You know, I think Kiefer Sutherland, Kiefer is just, he brings a lot of gravitas to the role. Part of that is that he's playing the much more kind of serious-minded member of the Three Musketeers, quote unquote. You know, like he really is, but he's also the more wounded of them, as what's happened with him and Lady de Winter, and so I think he plays the role really well, and it also plays into the fact that Kiefer has, you know, he kind of has that softer voice too. So to have him be the person who's more soft-spoken, but not in the sense that, like, he's weak, but he's soft-spoken in the sense that he doesn't speak a lot, and that when he speaks, it's important.
There you go. Yeah.
You know, I think that's the thing that he brings to the role, and that was really good casting on their part to bring him in. And like you said, I think the way he plays with Chris O'Donnell and kind of being, in the end, more of the father figure to him, whereas the other two are like his, like, crazy twin brothers,
right?
You know, and so I really appreciate that, and it's one of those things, like, I think he portrays. All of them take something seriously, of the Three Musketeers. Kiefer takes his drinking seriously. Athos takes his drinking seriously. And part of that, again, is the emotional pain that he still carries around from the relationship that he had with Lady de Winter and finding out the secret about her. And so, again, I think they cast him really well because he plays kind of that brooding character really perfectly. And then on top of that, you have Aramis, played by Charlie Sheen, who's the kind of the opposite of that in some ways, but he's not the exact opposite, because he has a part of, like, both of the other characters. You know, Porthos and Aramis. Porthos is the exact opposite of Athos.
Yeah.
Aramis, though, is kind of somewhere in the middle. And part of that is because he's a man who has been wronged by somebody he thought he could look up to in his faith, and that person was proven to be somebody just using the faith. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But he was under the tutelage of Cardinal Richelieu, looking to be, priest. He was studying to be a priest, and finds him to be a fraud. And so you have him kind of like being this person who's kind of acting out in some ways, like rebelling against that. He's at the beginning teaching that woman, quote unquote, theology, and
yeah, he was.
Yeah. So, but he, at the same time, he does the same thing I thought that, Kiefer does as Athos, where he's able to play the more serious moments well. He has that Charlie Sheen kind of glint in his eye, but at the same time, he also is able to take it serious when he needs to. So
This was actually a really different side of Charlie Sheen for me, because I've usually seen him in more of the goofy stuff, or, you know, all the Hollywood stories about Charlie Sheen as a person. So seeing him in this again, now being a bit older, it was interesting because they made him more like the Casanova of the group.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
he's about poetry and theology and the meaning of God in everyone's life. You know, it's just really interesting how they wrote that character, and then seeing Charlie Sheen portraying it. I think he did a really amazing job with it.
Yeah, and then, you know, to round it out, you have Oliver Platt playing Porthos, who is really just, I mean, he is the lovable kind of goofball of the group, who is basically the complete hedonist. You know, he's just out for the fun of life. You know, his quote of, "God, I love my work." You know, when he hits that guy with I don't even know what they call them. You know, the swinging balls. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh man, and
I don't know
Michael
what they're
told
called.
me.
So
yeah.
So, but he really is. He's just a complete hedonist, you know, and he's somebody who enjoys just the fun of life, you know. And he's like, "This sash was a gift to me from the Queen of America," you know, like. He just enjoys making things up and being a big goofball, and he makes me laugh every time. All of his lines I find funny, honestly.
Well,
so,
like
yeah.
His moment in the fight with the other, the guy with two swords on the ship, is one of the most memorable moments for me from the entire movie that I still remembered, even as a kid, where the guy stands up, whips out two knives and goes, "Ah!" And then Oliver Platt wields his one sword and goes, "Ah!"
Well, and then he beats him by you know, cutting the line and making him fall, which is so kind of Indiana Jones. You know, they're kind of riffing on that Raiders of the Lost Ark moment where he just pulls out his gun and shoots him. Yeah. Instead. So, no, I also always. This axe was a gift to me from the Tsarina of Tokyo. Like, he's funny, and he's meant to be kind of the comic relief in the movie. So I think they did a really good job with casting him. So this is really interesting to me, because Rebecca De Mornay plays Lady de Winter, and I thought it was fascinating that they had considered Winona Ryder as the role, but she dropped out. But I cannot imagine Winona Ryder at this point playing that role, because I just don't feel like she's old enough at all.
No, like now that we've seen Rebecca De Mornay in this role, it needed somebody with that maturity and that level of ice to the words that she spoke, I guess is the best way I can explain it, because everything she said, it was either trying to seduce somebody or it was completely cold as ice. And I just don't think that Winona Ryder was ready to play that kind of role yet.
And I think you mentioned something that was really, really smart, is that she needed to have that maturity to her, because one of the things about the character is the way that she uses her sexuality. And
that she was supposedly widowed. She's not a young girl.
Right. And a woman to be able to use her sexuality in the way that she does is usually a woman who is more mature and has a complete understanding as to every move that she's making and how it's being perceived, especially by the men around her, especially in this time period. And Rebecca De Mornay, I think, is the perfect person to do that. You know, she, because she's able to do that. She has that maturity. Like, and you're absolutely right. I mean, Winona Ryder, like, no, that would have been awful.
No, wrong fit. And I have to say, too, objectively, Rebecca De Mornay is gorgeous.
Oh, I mean, yeah, she was beautiful in this movie. And I mean, you know, who could forget her from, you know, a few years back, Risky Business with Tom Cruise. And so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, And I think that's the other thing is like if you've seen Risky Business, she kind of has that same type of character mode, that she's playing that kind of seductress and everything, but completely in control of what she's doing and why she's doing it for the most part. So yeah, and then I think the other part is that she has the maturity level to be able to then play the repentance that you get in that character here, to truly feel like she is somebody who's kind of sorry for her actions.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think she was a great choice.
And by the way, too, I meant to mention before we got too far away from this, her and Athos in this movie, I felt like was the main driver of everything. Even though it's called the Three Musketeers and there's actually 4 of them, I think that their love story, even just the first time you hear about it when Athos is telling it like it's not him, it's really moving and you feel so sorry for the both of them, but you also understand why it's happening. And so, I think the way that their story wraps up and she dies is kind of, is the way it needed to be, but also you wish it wasn't for them.
Yeah, and this is something where, just reading a little bit, I know that it's kind of changed quite a bit from the book, and they've made both of the characters there more sympathetic. But, I think for the story that they ended up telling here and the way they kind of crafted this Three Musketeers, it worked really well. And, like you said, she's kind of this linchpin because she's the link between Cardinal Richelieu and his takeover or his planned coup in France. And so I absolutely think you're right. And it brings the story together. So, quickly, this is the first time I saw Julie Depley, and she becomes famous for the Before Sunrise, After Sunset, all of those movies with Ethan Hawke. And funny, she's French. She's the only one who actually has a French accent in this movie. But at the time, I fell in love with her because, she was beautiful and, D'Artagnan's love interest, and she plays it really well. And again, funny that she's literally the only person in the movie with a French accent. So
no, that is funny, especially from a story that's entirely supposed to be about France.
Yeah, exactly. The villains here in the movie, Tim Curry is just chewing scenery at every moment and with every line, and I really like it. And part of that is it's sometimes just refreshing to see a villain who revels in their villainry. Like, he enjoys being the villain. He enjoys being the person who does all these things wrong. And I think it's refreshing to not have the complicated villain who, the reason they're like, he just wants power and he just wants to be able to rule. So, and I think he is perfect in the role for this type of movie. He is the classic, and this is not a slight against him at all, but he's the classic Disney villain, that comes from their animated features. And he pulls it off here in live action.
Yeah, well, I mean, anybody that's familiar with Tim Curry's work in general, he's usually a villain in anything he does. I vividly remember another version of Titanic with him as a villain in it, and it just, gives you chills. So he was absolutely the right choice for this character. He definitely takes your attention in every scene he's in. And the scenes where he's, approaching Queen Anne and breathing on her neck. He's so good. It makes me uncomfortable.
Absolutely. I think you said it. 100% creep all the time.
Yeah. But he's great.
Yeah. And I think that as somebody who's driving the story with, the villainy, and our main villain for the film, like, he's the one you love to hate. You kind of just enjoy hating him. And part of that is because he's having such a good time with his villainy. And I think it, again, just rewatching the film, I think it really works. So,
yeah, he's got it all under control. He's got a plan. He has henchmen to do the dirty work so he doesn't have to get his fancy robe dirty. And, I love that most of the film, he's totally cool and collected until the scene when he's revealing his plan to the king and queen and about to try and kill them again. And she says, "I'd rather die than sit on the throne beside you." And he finally just loses it, kicks a stool out of the way and says, "That could be arranged." He's just so good.
No, I agree with you. And I think Michael Wincott as Captain Rochefort next to him, like, he is such a great villain too, because together they make a great pair. They both revel in their villainry. And they love being the bad guy, and he just sounds like the bad guy too. And like the look and the feel of him, he is the quintessential swashbuckling villain. Like, he's kind of suave and debonair, and yet at the same time, he loves being evil. And so, I think together they make a great pair of villains for this movie. And, you could consider Lady de Winter as a villain as well, but I think these two just really pair up nicely. And again, you love it when they die. Like, and I think there's something that's sometimes been lost, is that we have the villains that do evil things that we can be okay with dying, in the end. And like, these are villains where you feel vindicated when they have died in the film. And that's really, it's just refreshing to be able to watch that type of movie.
Yeah, I wanted to add too, I think with Rochefort, it really also was a big deal to have him be the one that killed D'Artagnan's father. So to have that deeper connection for that surprise reveal for D'Artagnan then when the two of them are fighting makes it even more meaningful for him to finish him. And I think that it's nice having two villains like this that are so strong together, because like we were saying, you have the one who's really more of like the mastermind in the Cardinal, and then this guy Rochefort is doing the dirty work. And I noticed, if you think about it, Princess Bride and the Six-Fingered Man, and then very similarly, I think, to the character of Rochefort in this movie, why do they always have some weird physical trait like that? 6 fingers, missing an eye, or like Captain Hook, he's missing a hand. I just noticed that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And I think part of it is that because in the villain sense is like we're trying to make them seem less attractive in some way, and
or less relatable.
Less relatable, right? And like a Captain Hook, he has a hook for a hand. Like there's something missing from him. Like maybe that's it. Something's missing. Like there's a piece of them that's already missing, and part of that is usually come because of their villainy in the first place. And so because that's lost, you can already see that there's a hole in them that needs to be filled by something, and their villainy is not going to fill the hole, right? Even though that's probably what they're longing for. And it could be even the cause of the disfigurement, like losing an eye, or Captain Hook losing a hand, it's a result of their villainy. And so we can already see from the story is that like it doesn't pay to be the villain. So, yeah.
But yeah, just an observation. I also think it's funny when Oliver Platt says, "Rochefort, isn't that a stinky cheese?"
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. So something that I thought was kind of interesting was this idea of like power for power's sake, because the king at the end, as he's knighting D'Artagnan, making him a musketeer, he talks about how the world is uncertain and filled with danger, and honor undermined by power, he says, freedom sacrificed when the weak are oppressed by the strong, and there are those that oppose these forces. And this idea, like this movie, we kind of see people using power for the sake of getting more power, and then power trying to help people. And I thought that was an interesting dichotomy, you know, and you even have the king's men, the musketeers that are in the blue, and the cardinal's men that are in the red, and it kind of sets this, you know, like the black hats and the white hats, you know, and like the good and the bad side, and part of that is, what do you do with the power you've been given? And what we see here is clearly that, you know, the cardinal is all in this for the power that this will give him to be king, so that he can do whatever he wants to do, whereas that's obviously not how the king is trying to rule. And that's not why, you know, he has his musketeers, not only to keep him safe, but to make sure that, you know, everything else in the kingdom is proceeding as it should. So I just thought that was really interesting. And it's a nice little theme there for the movie that kind of plays out through the entire thing. Right.
I think you definitely see that sort of that quote, absolute power corrupts absolutely, that the cardinal definitely wants absolute power and wants to rule everyone and be, you know, this force to just subjugate everyone beneath him. Whereas the musketeers, for example, use power when they take his carriage and have the coins to help everyone else. They don't keep it all for themselves because they're greedy. He says, come on, toss them out. People are hungry, to D'Artagnan. And so that, I think you're definitely right, that you're seeing this dichotomy between the two of how power in itself is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's how you use it, and that they definitely show you what it can do when you use it for evil.
Absolutely. And something that you had brought up that I really loved, and I can't believe, and I had been thinking about while I was watching the movie, and I just totally forgot when I was writing the outline, which is usually why I'm like, I need to just make sure I'm taking notes. But the whole idea of like faith, and the way faith can be used by certain people. And here, you know, we totally saw faith be used, and because somebody truly believes it, like Aramis, he truly believes, you know, in God, and he was studying to be a priest, versus the cardinal, who is just somebody who's using his religious position to get power. And the way in which those two things are diametrically opposed to each other, and in the end, kind of antithetical to everything that, you know, faith in something like a religion like Christianity stands for, which is, you know, so I really thought that was really interesting, because you see the antithesis to the faith, but it's through the person who should be the one that's actually showing you what it's like to have real faith. And then you have these guys who are quote unquote the outlaws in the film, are actually the ones who are most living up to what it means to have honor and freedom and love and truth. And so I thought that was a really great theme that you had pulled out here with the film, and really an important one, because we see people misuse this all the time for personal gain.
Yeah, I think definitely this was the biggest thing that I always took from this movie, because they focus on it so much throughout the movie, of just prayer being in different scenes, and you seeing Aramis praying for the people that, even though they just killed them, he's hoping for, you know, their souls to go to heaven. And, you know, regardless of what you believe, I think that it's interesting to see how this even relates to religion and history in real life, because there were people like this cardinal who were just put in this position suspecting to be good people, but it was really just a position of power, and they may not have always actually been upholding the beliefs they're supposed to be upholding. And, it was that whole discussion of even how, like the separation of church and state became what it is, because back then church kind of ran everything. And there was this confusion between, religious beliefs running a country versus separating the two and having government and faith. So I think it's fascinating to kind of dive into that aspect of this movie, just the faith and how they discuss it. And then seeing that you're talking about too, the back and forth between Aramis and Cardinal and how they use that faith.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to be fair too, I think one of the things that we kind of see Aramis kind of do at the beginning of the film is maybe misuse some of the power that faith gives him.
Yeah.
Right? And I think what was interesting about that is that there is still some honor in that, because the moment he learns that she's married, it's off limits.
Mm-hmm.
If she decides to married, leave. Right, exactly. That would have been one thing. But the moment that he realizes she is, for him, it's a big sin. It's not just a sin because it would have been anyway, but it would have been a bigger one, right? So, there's some lines that you don't cross, and so I do think that that's really fascinating, because it is, and I think you made this point on the outline. I think it's so true. It's a reflection of the times then, but on morals to which we do want to continue to hold true, with which we want there to be truth that we hold to, and that we have honor as people, that we value freedom and we respect love, and that we don't want to misuse our faith in any way, and we want to make sure that we're keeping that faith pure, and not mixing it with something that it does not belong. I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that this movie kind of has that as a part of it. So, lastly, the thing that I was thinking of the most is that, this was a big soundtrack for me, a big deal. Part of that was the fact that, Bryan Adams sings the main song, All for Love, with Rod Stewart and Sting. So all three of these big stars together on one song. So I had the soundtrack, listened to this song all the time. But it wasn't just the song. I really enjoyed the music for the movie. It's fun. It's vibrant. It has the feel of what you want for an action, adventure, romance movie. I wish that there was an extended version of the soundtrack itself, just because the score is really enjoyable. But, as a kid, it all came down to me loving that song. I loved All for Love. It was great.
Yeah, first of all, Bryan Adams, and back then in his peak as well, was just incredible. He had such a cool sound to his voice. It was almost kind of raspy, but I love his stuff anyway. And so I was destined to love that song. And then bringing in Sting and Rod Stewart to do it with him, it's this beautiful symphony, having the three of them singing in the same song. But I do agree too, the soundtrack for the entire movie is perfect for the feel you're going for of this swashbuckler adventure movie. The horseback riding, sword fighting, getting into shenanigans kind of thing. And it really does especially get across the depth in some of the scenes. I think that for sure you feel it in that moment, like I said, where Athos is saying goodbye to Lady de Winter. And I did not have any issue at all with the soundtrack, and I would listen to it again.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm really interested, as we talk through the film, kind of where you are then with your ratings for the Three Musketeers.
Well, obviously it's high. It's very high.
Thank you, K2SO.
But I had to. I'm going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. And a lot of that also is just pure nostalgia and love. But I really just always enjoy rewatching this movie. I was glad that you brought up maybe we should talk about it. And I like that we've discovered these new things that you can read into it and take from it that maybe you didn't as a kid. So yeah, a 4.5 for me.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for me personally, this movie still holds up, and I would encourage, like, it's a fun movie for anybody to watch. You know, I would say it's a 4 out of 5 for me. It's just, I had a great time rewatching it. You know, and that's always the goal when you're rewatching something like this. And yeah, I mean, and anybody can say this about just about anything, right? But it's not perfect. You know, hardly any movie is, but I feel like, and I was thinking about this as I was rewatching this one. I feel like we're in a time specifically where people need something joyful and fun to watch, and this is definitely the prescription for that. So if you're just looking for a good old time, this is it. So. Yeah, we're both recommending you watch the Three Musketeers there on Disney Plus. So, Christy, though, I'm really interested to see what you might have as a recommendation this week.
So, I actually recently, with my husband, have been looking back into some comics we used to read, and something that I really loved and I've now wanted to pull back out was a run called Gotham City Sirens.
Oh, yeah.
Nice. Paul Dini actually did the artwork, and it was beautiful. And one of my favorite comic book character actually is Catwoman. So getting to see her paired up with Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy, just the three of them fighting crime together, was really interesting. So I highly recommend checking out Gotham City Sirens. You can probably find it on Amazon or eBay.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I'm sure, if you wanted to check out, you could probably find it if you do digital, like on Comixology, too.
Yeah, because it would be DC, so it may even be on, would it be on the DC app?
DC Universe, yeah. If you have DC Universe, it might be there, too. Absolutely. No, that's great. Well, I'm going to recommend, because I just finished it today, and as we're recording this, we'll be doing it in a few weeks. And so I'm going to recommend everybody pick up Thrawn Ascendancy Chaos Rising. And I'm not going to give it away, but I definitely think you should read it. Read it. So, but Christy, if anybody wants to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at BestBenBell. And I do a couple of other shows. I do a show on the Skywalking Through Neverland network with my good friend Teresa Delgado called Sabers and Spells. And we're going to be doing an episode sometime in the near future. Sorry, it's been a little hiatus, but she's just got a lot going on, and so do I right now. So, and then I do a show called Planet Leia on the Fantatrax network with 5 other women from around the world talking about Star Wars.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero under the name MattRushing02. You can find me here on the network doing The Orb with Chris Jones as we talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Doing Literary Treks again. We just had our first episode that Chris and I have done and together in a long while. We had David Mack talking about his latest Star Trek book. You can find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing 2 shows. One is called Owl Post, doing that with Drea Kaufman. We're talking about Harry Potter each and every week, 1 chapter at a time. And Lynn, you could find me doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, the Star Wars podcast, and every week and talk about and really have fun diving into a subject we've been thinking about in Star Wars. So thank you, though, so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?